Hey, welcome to the Accelerating Operational Performance Podcast. I'm Greg Schenkel, President of Unique Training and Development and Frontline Leadership Systems. And you know our mission here. It's to make your career progress faster, your projects go quicker. And we do that by interviewing some amazing guests. I'll also say that today's episode is brought to you by our new Site Leader Development Program. And the Site Leader Development Program is really geared for plant managers, distribution center managers, and other senior leaders on how to effectively empower and hold accountable all the people in the organization who are supposed to be running the business so that the more senior leaders can focus on longer term and higher value activities. So if you're interested, of course, reach out to us through our website at uniquedevelopment.com. My guest today is a colleague of mine who I've known for several years. We're actually in very similar businesses, but as I like to say, she really trained some of the brightest minds in her field of training frontline leaders in biotech. And so let me introduce our guest to you today, and I want to do her justice, so I'm going to read some of it. Our guest today is Gwen Acton. Or Dr. Gwen Acton, I could say. And Gwen Acton, PhD, is the CEO of Vivo Group, a firm that partners with R&D organizations to transform brilliant technical experts into high-impact leaders. Dr. Acton has worked with more than 5,000 leaders across the science and technology sector, from Fortune 100 corporations and companies to innovation-driven, mid-sized companies and research institutes. She is the author of the newly released, yay, it's out, Leadership for Scientists and Engineers, which is a practical guide for technical experts who want to improve their leadership skills. She holds a doctorate in biology from MIT, no slouch there, where she worked in a Nobel Prize-winning lab and has served as a faculty member at Harvard University. Gwen, it's fantastic to have you join us. Welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here, Greg.
Yeah, so
Looking forward to it.
Well, Gwen and I are also fellow members of an association of learning providers, and certainly I've enjoyed over the years, Gwen, bouncing ideas back and forth in terms of how we run our businesses. And Gwen, you and I are both in the business of basically taking people who were doing quite well as individual contributors, and then whether they volunteered or were voluntold, they ended up in this leadership role, and our jobs are really to help them with that. Oh, by the way, I should mention, if anyone needs to reach out to Gwen, first of all, the book is excellent. I had a chance to get a preview copy. It's now out and available on Amazon. Again, the name of the book is Leadership for Scientists and Engineers by Dr. Gwen Acton, and you can find it on Amazon. It's tremendous. If you need to reach Gwen, of course, you can do that through her website at vivogroup.com, and on LinkedIn, just search for Gwen-Acton, and you can find her on LinkedIn. So, Gwen, first of all, I know writing a book is not an easy task, and I know you worked really hard on this one, and it is really well written. I'm not just saying that because you're a guest on the podcast. It was really, really well written. I said to my wife, Robin, as I was reading it, I said, I wish I wrote this book, and I told you that in an email. So what is it that inspired you to write this book in the first place?
Oh, thanks for asking, Greg. So I've been doing leadership development for scientists and engineers for over 15 years, and I started to see some patterns that kept coming up over and over again. And I also saw, a couple of the patterns, for example, is struggling with delegation, needing to delegate, but then fearing that it won't be done well or not enough time to delegate. And then many of the managers ending up being micromanagers, something that no one likes micromanagers, but they ended up being micromanagers because they didn't have the tools to do it any other way, or they avoided giving feedback simply, again, because they didn't have the tools to do it. And so I saw these patterns, and meanwhile, I was doing these leadership workshops and really saw how the showing new managers, any manager, techniques and tools can really improve their ability to do a good job.
Right.
And I really believe that most managers want to do a good job. It's more fun, it's more satisfying, you get more done. But they were struggling because nobody had ever given them those tools. And so the book is an attempt to put that wisdom into a form that can spread the word and really help people to become better leaders throughout the world.
Yeah, I think your audience even more so is wants excellence, wants to achieve good things, and so they get into this role that they really aren't prepared for. They're kind of maybe ambitious in their career path, and so they see this as one of the ways to grow in their career. But I could also see that there can be, well, they probably soon recognize. Actually, I would also, and you put this in your book, I also think some of them avoid taking leadership roles because they've seen other leaders in those roles struggling with it. And I'm just curious, why is this important for this effective frontline leadership in sort of a science and technology organization? What benefit do you see it bringing?
So I think I like the phrase you used earlier, voluntold. Many scientists and engineers end up in their first leadership or management position without having ever asked for it. In fact, I start out my book. Suppose you wake up and all of a sudden you're a leader, and how do you now do that well? And you're right. I think most of them want to do a good job. I think the hesitancy is also because most scientists and engineers got into science or engineering because they like the science or the technical aspects, and not they weren't really driven by most of them weren't really driven by the people aspects. They wanted really to accomplish, they wanted to solve problems, they wanted to be practicing that science or technology, and then they get promoted into these leadership roles, and it requires a really different set of skills. And I know you know that because that's what you work with frontline leaders as well. And many of the skills are just not innate. We're not born with the ability to provide feedback.
Right.
For
Right.
example, right?
Yeah.
Providing feedback is really hard. We're not. Many of us are not particularly good at delegation. In fact, the whole schooling system really push us into doing things on our own. You think about in schools how much, I mean, collaboration maybe, but that idea of delegation is not something we foster much in school, in the schooling system.
Right.
And then you get into these leadership positions, and all of a sudden there's this new thing about delegation that you've never done before. It's essential for the role. And in fact, why you got into the position is because you were really good as an individual contributor, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea of delegation, well, but I'm really good at it. So, and I'm going to delegate it to other people, and maybe they're not going to do it well. And by the way, I don't have enough time to train them. And all of a sudden you have a lot of resistance to this incredibly essential piece of it. So I think that, and in terms of the importance of frontline leaders, and I think, obviously you see this as well, is that a majority of the employees in any organization are actually reporting to those frontline leaders, right? And so though the frontline leaders are actually working with the majority of the employees. And in fact, there's extensive research saying that 70% of an employee's reaction to a company or engagement with a company has to do with that manager reaction. So tremendous impact on the success of that organization simply through those frontline leaders. So, so new skills, ones they haven't learned, and huge impact that I think is easy to overlook, but is incredibly important to do well. And by the way, if you set up your frontline leaders to do a good job, then they're gonna be able to provide more as they rise through the organization as well.
That's a good point.
Those are all the reasons, I think. Yeah. Do you agree, Greg? I mean, you work with a lot of frontline leaders as well. What do you think is their importance?
I agree. No, I definitely agree, Gwen. The one thing I was going to say is that in a technical organization, because those sort of what you might call the softer skills of delegation and leadership and culture building and so forth might be almost dismissed by someone whose focus has been on a technical aspect of breakthroughs or innovation. And yet you could probably argue that the ability of that team of researchers to deliver on whatever they're trying to prove or bring to market is really going to be impacted quite a bit by whoever's leading that group. And a friend of, or someone I know who's currently doing her PhD is really struggling with the person who's running the lab and the experiment where the funding is based. And she says, I don't think that the person leading our group even has a clue that some of his behaviors are actually holding us back from actually achieving some of the objectives in the research. I don't know whether you've seen that too, where the leader, actually impacts the level of technical work and its ability to make progress.
Absolutely. Great point, Greg. And by the way, tell her to buy my book and to give it to her, give it to her principal investigator, because that's why I wrote this book.
What she needs, Gwen, is probably to get a copy on her boss's desk.
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
exactly. Get it on his desk.
Anonymous. You should read this
that's
anonymous.
True. Yes, anonymously. Right. Absolutely. Yeah, because one of the characteristics of leaders who haven't been trained is they don't receive feedback well, right? They get very defensive and they don't know how to learn from that. But absolutely, yes, that is definitely the case, that there are many blind spots. I think that is incredibly important for leadership, is having the leadership mindset, having the right frameworks, being able to see. Like one of the things I do in the book, as well as in the training we do, is really try and help leaders to understand the very common ways that they are doing a worse job than they think they are. Yeah. So one of the classics is what I see in many science and technology organizations is a scientist or engineer, somebody brings, one of their reports brings them an idea, and they say, that's not a good idea. And they think they're being really honest, which they are. They're being honest. What they don't realize is how the report hears it. Yeah. It's one thing to hear that's a bad idea from your peer. Yeah. And it's one thing if it's your peer and you're talking about a technical idea. Right. It's a completely different idea when you're in an organization and your boss says that to you. Right. Many leaders are blind to how much impact they have on those below them. For example, one of the exercises we do in my leadership workshop is I'm like, how are all the ways that your boss impacts you? And they're like, well, my salary, what I'm working on, my promotion, my visibility in the organization, all of those pieces that your boss influences. And so one of the ways I frame it is your boss has more power than you, or if you're a boss, you have more power over your reports. And I like to tag on to that, like it or not, because most of the folks I work with are not, they are not political. They are not looking for, I don't want to be political or have that power, but you do. And you need to really recognize that difference, because if you're blind to it, it's much easier for us to recognize power over us than our power over others. And if you don't recognize it, you make mistakes like, oh, I want to just be friends with everybody. Yeah. And it's like, well, that's a really nice intention. Right. But the problem is that you're not. You're right. Not friends, you're impacting their salary, their career, their work, etc. And so there's that imbalance that makes it very hard to maintain a relationship, especially as groups get bigger. And so again, I think most of the mistakes that I see that leaders and managers make are with the best of intentions. They just, as you really astutely just pointed out, they just don't recognize what impact.
I can see that in this young PhD candidate, that the leader, the boss, the manager, or the supervisor thinks he's being helpful by critiquing the work and that sort of thing, but doesn't realize that this is a young person who's trying to find their way and trying to get a little bit more context and a little bit more guidance and information and maybe a little encouragement and all these things that will eventually create that. Now, one of the things that I'm sure you've seen, and certainly this person brought to my attention, she said, I think people get in this mode of this is how they came up. They came up having to go through this PhD gauntlet, and they figured that everybody needs to just kind of toughen up and go through it. And there's a lot of industries like that, which is like, hey, we're not going to baby you. You're just going to be in the deep end. And yeah, I was brought to tears several times, and that's just how you get through it. And if you survive, then you get to be my job. And then your job is to make other people break into tears, which of course is not really the outcome that we're looking for. I was wondering if you could share like this idea of someone who does recognize this, either buys your book and gets some help by doing that, maybe takes one of your courses. What are some of the things you've seen people transform as a result of this new enlightenment?
Oh, and so many different dimensions. And I just want to, that point about people lead the way they were led. The way I think about it is the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
If that's all you know, then that's all, that's many folks, that's all they've seen is bad leadership examples. And that's how they've been trained. And like you said, they don't understand the impact it might have. And so I think that's incredibly important for resistance. I think another resistance to leadership, improving leadership skills, is it's much harder to measure. It's easier to measure, did this assay work or not? Or, you're in manufacturing plants, did this component, did it work or not, right? Yeah. But when you are talking about leadership, we don't have the same sort of measurement tools. I mean, we can see there are many measurements where we can see a correlation. And I think just sometimes that companies and organizations don't realize that exists, that there actually is some nice data, though it can be, traditionally, it's been harder to see. But your question was, how can people benefit?
Even what breakthroughs, more like what breakthroughs you've seen, whether, I mean, your book's just recently published, but you've been training on this for a long time. And you must have seen the light bulb go on in leaders who finally had this breakthrough moment and they changed the way that they were leading their teams. Can you just maybe illustrate an example?
I love that breakthrough moment. To me, that is one of the reasons I do this, is to change a trajectory forever, right? To have folks recognize something. A couple examples are, one of my philosophies, as I said, is to really assume that people have good intentions. And in many programs, I'll have people go, oh, they have good intentions. Or in providing feedback, not to get confused by our brains automatically start to add all this interpretation to what people do, but really to get back to what's the data, what did I actually observe that person do, and how important that is for giving clean feedback. Or another story I love from one of the workshops was somebody who came in, and she was spending literally 2 hours a day on she interfaced with doctors who would call in for information, and she had her team, and she would reach out to her team to see who could answer the question. And in the course of the workshop, we talked about setting up processes, right? To think about, how are you organizing your work? And she was able to use that to, instead of reaching out when the doctor reached in and tried to find one of the folks in her group to answer it, she instead had a sign-up sheet, and each person in her group could claim a morning or an afternoon that week. There were 10 people in her group. And guess what? All of a sudden, she saved 2 hours a day. Not having to reach out to people. And her group was much happier with the system as well, because they knew when they were going to be on call. And so they would set aside that time, and they knew the rest of the week they weren't going to be interrupted. And if you can imagine how many emails were saved there, how many back and forths were saved there. So that, when you talk about time, sometimes that can be a really quick win with people. Or running an efficient meeting. If you think about, if I can save one meeting a week, right? If I can cut out 1 hour-long meeting a week, because I realize it doesn't have a purpose, then it's not serving its function, or I don't need to be there, or I can get caught up some other way. You're talking 50 hours a year.
Yeah.
And that's just if it's 1 hour a week that you can save. And so those kind of breakthroughs, I mean, I could go on because that is the purpose of this. And what I find remarkable is, especially because I'm working with scientists and engineers, that if they they have this capability, that if they see something, in science and technology and engineering, we are often confronted with the data that says our preconceived notions were wrong. We are often like, oh, I did this and I thought it was going to work this way, and then it didn't. And we are incredibly adept at being able to go, oh, the data says that's wrong, so I'm gonna adjust based on that data. And that's what I think is such a high return on investment for science and technology companies, is that if you can take these are very highly paid, very highly invested, very brilliant folks. If you can get them to recognize some of these issues and that mindset piece, it's all of a sudden they go from here to there.
Yeah.
They're able to shift and really able to do things differently. Now, is everybody going to be a great leader? No, I think of it as like shifting the curve. You're able to shift the curve over to a certain extent because you're able to change how people think about things. So you're not going to make everybody a brilliant leader, but you can continue, if you follow up, if the organization support it, you can make dramatic changes. Actually, let me just add one more thing, because we have one aspect we have measured is confidence levels. And we can show after a single day of training that we have, oftentimes a twofold increase in confidence levels, right? We have people coming in out of a scale of 1 to 10, coming in at 1 or 2, really not confident about being able to give feedback or running a one-on-one or being able to delegate or all of these different fundamental skills. And at the end of the training, going from an average of, some folks at 1 or 2, an average of 4, all of a sudden up to an average of 8, right? With some folks at 10. So you can show a dramatic increase after just one single day of training. And I think that is phenomenal.
That is phenomenal, especially for people who are data driven. And again, we're talking with Gwen Acton, Dr. Gwen Acton, who is the author of the new book recently released called Leadership for Scientists and Engineers. And I know, Gwen, that some of the work you do is with early stage companies that are in that research phase and, either having plans to go public or be acquired, and really using a lot of the tools that you're talking about can really accelerate a lot of their breakthroughs in their projects, which could technically bring them to market quicker. And nothing's more important if you're an investor in the biotech industry than to see the things that you're investing in move along, and maybe the opposite of being impeded by weaker leadership. How much does leadership make a difference in bringing the product to market quicker, getting the breakthroughs done quicker? And the other thing that we probably don't consider enough is that the dynamics around developing leaders is a compounding investment, because it's not just helping that team at that moment, it's really actually setting the stage for a greater leadership at all levels as those people are trained and then they get promoted and other people are trained. It's really this compounding effect. So it's not even one biotech project that might be trying to prove itself for market viability. It's really about setting the stage for a winning sort of method that you can just keep using because you've got more effective leadership than another biotech company which has a more traditional leadership style. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. And one of the symptoms, many of the companies I work with, and I do work with both smaller companies. I work with a lot of medium-sized companies that are 100 to 500 employees, and then also everything ranging from 1,000 to Fortune 100 companies, right? So all of those, they all face similar issues when you're talking about a scientist or an engineer who is trying to be a leader. So regardless of the organization, well, there's differences, but there's some fundamental things they all need to be able to do to be effective. Right. But that you raise an excellent point about, for example, timelines. So so many of the folks I work with are in R&D, and R&D often has missed timelines, and organizations, that to me is an example of a leadership issue.
Right.
Now, yes, of course, there can be some technical failures that cause the missing of the deadline. But more often than that, I see it as for example, lack of prioritization, right? So that what happens is like most scientists and engineers, we get really excited by like, oh, I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I want to do this, right? And so we all of a sudden have this big plate of all these different things we want to do. And I don't think we're unique. When I talk to people, friends who are not scientists and engineers, you hear a lot in our current organizations about people being like so busy during the day. They're like trying to catch up with work at night, right? So busy, right? Busy, and like putting out fires, like I got to do this, I got to do that, and I'm going to this meeting, right? Those are all symptoms of lack of prioritization within the organization, or lack of alignment within the organization, right? So senior leadership is thinking one thing, and then if it's R&D, things change, right? Something fails, whatever. So, and all of a sudden the priorities shift a little. And if that's not properly communicated throughout the organization, all of a sudden you have misaligned priorities. You have senior leadership thinking, A, B, and C are important, but that hasn't been communicating. So folks down here are working on D, E, and F, right? Yeah. Different set. And so missed deadlines are a great example, as you said, huge value, right? Yeah. If you're working on a pharmaceutical, every day it's available on the market is worth a quantifiably large amount of money, depending on what the drug happens to be. And so anything you can do to make that, as you said, to make that go faster is going to be helpful. And timing and meeting deadlines has a huge impact from leaders. You mentioned investors. What's really interesting is that when investors are investing in early stage companies, they think a lot about who's the leadership, right? Who's the leadership, and do they have experience? And then what happens is then the company starts moving along, and somehow the enlightened companies realize how important this is and how much more successful they're going to be. But some don't, and you see the consequences, right? You see them. I think they have higher rates of failure. I think they have longer timelines. Obviously, higher turnover. I mean, that's easy. That's been easily documented throughout the literature. If you don't have competent leadership, but lower engagement, right? And engagement is immensely important when you're talking about scientists and engineers, because they are incredibly self-motivated. So if you're not motivating them to be working on things, they'll do the work, but you're not going to get nearly the kind of productivity and performance as if they are fully engaged and really inspired. And I would argue, Greg, there's a lot. You're reading in the news a lot right now about people feeling burned out, people feeling disengaged. And again, those are all signs, and burned out, right? Those are all signs of leadership issues, right? Because we get burnout, we get disengagement because we're not, we have too many priorities, right? We can't get anything done, or lack, I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? I don't know the purpose of what I'm doing. We are so driven by wanting to know how we're contributing. I mean, not just scientists and engineers. We all are. We like to feel like, we're contributing. So great point about how much value this is for the organizations. Huge returns on investment. I was just talking to, somebody who was, we were talking about the salary ranges. We were talking about his customers, right? And how much each deal was worth, and how his leaders were interacting with the customers. And, it's just like huge impact on the ability, because, in science and technology, so much of it is driven by the people aspect. So yes, excellent point.
So one thing that listeners, when I and viewers, when I read through Gwen's book, and I provided again, you can buy it on Amazon.com. I reviewed it, and what I really liked about the structure of the book is that it went through just even the basic building blocks of, as Gwen mentioned, doing effective one-on-ones, running an effective meeting, how to deliver feedback, in such a way that it enables your team and is constructive in a way to make the team better over time. So really, even our own clients who are more in the operations and manufacturing sector, if you've got a division of your group that's more scientific, R&D oriented, I would strongly refer you to Gwen for both the training, but also to get a copy of this book. So if you have a frustrated leader in your family who's in the science and technology space, this book will help them immensely because it'll reduce their stress and increase their effectiveness. Gwen, as we get sort of towards the end of our time together, I'm just curious if there's maybe something that you'd want to leave with our audience that would really be helpful for them, or something we didn't talk about that you think would help them, besides, of course, buying a copy of your book or reaching out to you if they have any training needs.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think we've covered a lot of ground here, Greg, and yeah, just appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. And I know that you are somebody who really understands the impact of all leaders in the organization, right? From top to bottom, they all have an impact. So it's a pleasure talking to somebody. And thank you for having read the book and your comments about the book. So
yeah, I wouldn't say it. You'd hear crickets if I didn't like it. So I really did like it. And the other thing I guess I'd mention, and my dad used to share this with me because he started our training business before I took it over. And he said, you're going to pay for training no matter what. You're going to pay for training whether you do it or you don't do it. If you don't do it, you're going to pay it through turnover. And the other thing about scientists and engineers, and Gwen, you know this, because they're so skilled, and job markets, ebb and flow from time to time, but they're generally portable, meaning if they don't like working in your company on your project, they can easily, probably, especially if they're good, they can get recruited to go somewhere else. And so you got to ask yourself, if you're saying, my leadership's okay, and the most brilliant people don't want to work for you anymore, then you're going to be left with less brilliant people getting more frustrated about deadlines being blown and the quality of the work. So this is something, if you're a leader in a technology space, you need to get a copy of the book. You need to talk to Gwen. Again, we've been talking with Dr. Gwen Acton, who is the author of the most recently released book called Leadership for Scientists and Engineers. You can buy it on Amazon. You can also reach out to Gwen at vivogroup.com and also on LinkedIn, Gwen Acton. So Gwen, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
It was a pleasure, Greg. Great to be here with you.
And thank you for watching and being a viewer of our podcast. Remember, we do publish it on YouTube under unique.leadership is our channel on YouTube. We also, of course, publish it in audio format. We have a blog with lots of detailed information, including links to Gwen's website and places where you can purchase her book. Again, we only wish the best for you on your leadership journey. And if we can be of assistance to you, of course, reach out to us at uniquedevelopment.com. For now, this is Greg Schinkel signing off and wishing you a success on your leadership journey.